Have you ever wondered why smart people make dumb decisions? Why do we repeat the same mistakes, fall for the same tricks, or fail to see what's right in front of us? The truth is, our brains are wired with hidden traps that disrupt our thinking every single day. But what if you could learn to spot these traps and outsmart them? In this video, we're diving into The Art of Thinking Clearly by Rolf Dobelli, a treasure trove of eye-opening insights that will transform the way you think. Also get ready to uncover the top 5 lessons from the book that will sharpen your mind and help you make better decisions in every aspect of your life. Welcome to Book Spark, where we turn pages into pathways to problem solving. Today, we're exploring a book that has the power to reshape your understanding of how you think. The Art of Thinking Clearly by Rolf Dobelli. Imagine having a toolbox filled with strategies to battle the most common thinking errors we all make. That's exactly what Dobelli offers in this remarkable book. Drawing from the fields of cognitive science, psychology, and behavioral economics, he presents a comprehensive guide to recognizing and overcoming our cognitive biases. But why should you care about these biases? Because they affect every decision you make, from what you eat for breakfast to how you invest your life savings. These mental blind spots can lead us astray, causing us to make poor choices, misunderstand situations, and even interrupt our own success. Dobelli breaks down these complex concepts into chapters, each tackling a specific cognitive error. It's like having a personal trainer for your brain, pointing out where you're going wrong and how to correct your form. What sets this book apart is its practicality. It's not just about understanding these biases, it's about learning how to sidestep them in your daily life. Whether you're a student, a professional, an entrepreneur, or simply someone who wants to think more clearly, this book has something valuable to offer. So, are you ready to get on this journey of mental improvement? Let's dive into The Art of Thinking Clearly and discover how to navigate the unfaithful waters of our own minds. Chapter 1. Survivorship Bias. Let's start with a bias that could be costing you right now: survivorship bias. This is our tendency to focus on the winners in any situation while ignoring the far more numerous losers. Dobelli illustrates this with a fascinating World War II story. During the war, the military was looking to reinforce their planes to reduce losses. They examined returning aircraft and noticed that some areas had more bullet holes than others. Their initial impulse? Reinforce those areas. But statistician Abraham Wald pointed out a crucial flaw in their thinking. The planes they were looking at were the survivors. The ones that didn't make it back were likely hit in other areas. By focusing only on the returning planes, they were falling victim to survivorship bias. This bias doesn't just apply to warplanes, it's everywhere in our lives. We look at successful entrepreneurs and try to compete with them, forgetting about the countless others who followed the same path but failed. We read about lottery winners but overlook the millions who lost. To fight this bias, Dobelli advises us to look beyond the success stories. Ask yourself, what about the silent, invisible failures? What can I learn from them? By doing this, you'll gain a more balanced perspective and avoid being misled by the glare of success. Chapter 2. The Swimmer's Body Illusion. Next, let's talk about a bias that might be influencing your fitness goals: the swimmer's body illusion. Have you ever looked at professional swimmers and thought, if I take up swimming, I'll get a body like that? Well, you might be falling for this illusion. Dobelli explains that we often confuse selection factors with results. Professional swimmers don't have great bodies because they swim. Rather, they are selected to be swimmers because they have great bodies. Their body composition is more a requirement for their swimming than an outcome. This illusion extends far beyond the pool. It's why we might believe that studying philosophy will make us smarter, when in reality smarter people might be more drawn to studying philosophy. Or that all Harvard graduates are brilliant, when Harvard's selection process ensures they admit brilliant people in the first place. To avoid this trap, Dobelli suggests looking at the big picture. Don't just focus on the end result. Consider the selection criteria and the starting point. This way you can set more realistic expectations and avoid disappointment. Chapter 3. Clustering Illusion. Now let's explore a bias that can lead us to see patterns where none exist, the clustering illusion. Our brains are pattern-seeking machines, which is usually helpful. But sometimes this tendency can mislead us. Dobelli gives an example of a teacher who noticed that the best students in her class all sat in the front row. She concluded that sitting in the front leads to better grades. But is this really true? Or could it be that the most motivated students choose to sit in the front? This illusion can be particularly dangerous in fields like investing, where people might see hot streaks in random data. A stock that's been rising for several days isn't necessarily going to continue rising. Each day's performance is largely independent of the previous day. To fight this illusion, Dobelli advises us to be drawing conclusions about patterns from small samples. Just because you've won 3 times in a row at roulette doesn't mean you're on a lucky streak. Remember, in a large enough data set, clusters will always appear by chance. The key is to look for larger trends and understand the underlying mechanisms, rather than being swayed by short-term patterns. Chapter 4. Social Proof. Let's move on to a bias that deeply influences our behavior. Social proof. This is our tendency to view a behavior as correct in a given situation, to the degree that we see others performing it. It's why prefabricated laughter is used in situation comedy, why bartenders salt their tip jars with a few bills at the beginning of a shift, and why the longest queue at a food festival might not necessarily lead to the best food. Dobelli shares an alarming example from history. In 1978, over 900 members of a cult called People's Temple committed mass suicide in Jonestown, Guyana. Why? Partly because of social proof. Once some members started the process, others followed, believing that if everyone else was doing it, it must be the right thing to do. While this is an extreme example, social proof influences us daily in subtler ways. We're more likely to stay in a bad movie if no one else is leaving. We're more inclined to believe a product is good if it has many positive reviews. To resist this bias, Dobelli suggests thinking independently. Just because everyone is doing something doesn't make it right or beneficial. Ask yourself, what would I do if I were the only person on Earth? This can help you make decisions based on your own values and judgment, rather than simply following the herd. Chapter 5. Sunk cost fallacy. Now let's discuss a bias that keeps us stuck in bad situations. The sunk cost fallacy. This is our tendency to continue investing in something simply because we've already invested so much, even when it no longer makes sense. Dobelli gives a personal example. He once bought a non-refundable ticket to a Broadway show. On the night of the show, he was tired and really didn't feel like going. But he went anyway, thinking, I've already paid for the ticket, so I have to go. He ended up having an unhappy time. In observation, he realized that the money was spent whether he went or not. By going, he only made things worse by wasting his time too. This fallacy is why people stay in unfulfilling relationships, why businesses continue pouring money into failing projects, and why governments reinforce unwinnable wars. We hate to admit that our past investments were wasted, so we invest even more. To overcome this, Dobelli advises us to focus on the future, not the past. Ignore sunk costs. Instead, ask yourself, regardless of what I've already invested, what's the best course of action from now on? This forward-looking approach can free you from the trap of past decisions and lead to better choices. Chapter 6. Reciprocity. Let's explore a bias that marketers love to use, reciprocity. This is our strong urge to repay debts of all kinds. If someone does something for us, we feel compelled to do something for them in return. Dobelli shares an experiment conducted by sociologist Philip Koons. Koons sent out 600 Christmas cards to complete strangers. Surprisingly, he received over 200 cards in return. Why? Because of reciprocity. Even though these people didn't know Koons, they felt in somebody's debt to send a card back after receiving one. This bias is why free samples are so effective. When a supermarket offers you a small piece of cheese, they're not just being nice. They're invoking the reciprocity rule. You taste the free food and then feel indebted to buy something. Dobelli warns that reciprocity can lead us to agree to things we don't really want. A colleague does you a small favor, and suddenly you feel forced to help them with a much larger task. A salesperson gives you their time and attention, and you end up buying a product you don't need. To fight this, Dobelli suggests being aware of the rule and its intensity. Recognize when someone is trying to trigger your reciprocity bias. Then, make a conscious decision about whether you genuinely want to reciprocate or if you're just feeling indebted. It's okay to politely decline sometimes. Chapter 7. Confirmation Bias. Now, let's tackle what might be the mother of all biases: confirmation bias. This is our tendency to search for, interpret, favor, and recall information in a way that confirms our pre-existing beliefs. Dobelli explains this with a thought experiment. Imagine you're given information about a person named Linda. Linda is 31 years old, single, outspoken, and very bright. She majored in philosophy. As a student, she was deeply concerned with issues of discrimination and social justice, and also participated in anti-nuclear protests. Now, which is more probable? A. Linda is a bank teller. B. Linda is a bank teller and is active in the feminist movement. Most people choose B, but this is incorrect. The probability of two events occurring together, in this case Linda being a bank teller and a feminist, is always less than or equal to the probability of either one occurring alone. So why do we get it wrong? Because once we have a theory about Linda, that she's likely a feminist, we look for information that confirms it, even if it leads us to an illogical conclusion. This bias affects us in countless ways. It's why we tend to read news sources that align with our political views, why we remember the hits and forget the misses when evaluating a fortune teller, and why it's so hard to change someone's mind with facts alone. To fight this bias, Dobelli advises us to actively seek out disconfirming evidence. If you have an opinion on something, don't just look for information that supports it. Instead, go out of your way to find the most convincing and intelligent counter-arguments. It's uncomfortable, but it's the best way to test. Chapter 8. Authority Bias. Let's move on to a bias that can lead us to place too much faith in the judgment of experts. Authority bias. This is our tendency to attribute greater accuracy to the opinion of an authority figure and be more influenced by that opinion. Dobelli recounts the infamous Milgram experiment to explain this bias. In the 1960s, psychologist Stanley Milgram conducted a series of studies on conformity. Participants were told they were part of a learning experiment and were instructed by an authority figure, a scientist in a lab coat, to manage increasingly painful electric shocks to another person, who was actually an actor. Shockingly, many participants continued to obey, even when they thought they were causing severe harm, simply because the authority figure told them to do so. While this is an extreme example, we encounter minor forms of authority bias every day. We're more likely to follow the advice of a doctor, even if we don't fully understand it. We tend to believe news delivered by an anchor in a suit more than the same news delivered by someone in casual clothing. Dobelli warns that this bias can be dangerous because no one is dependable, not even experts. Doctors make mistakes. Financial advisors can be wrong, and even Nobel laureates can give bad advice outside their field of expertise. To tackle this bias, Dobelli suggests questioning authority. Don't just accept something because an expert said it. Instead, try to understand their reasoning. Look for non-conforming opinions from other experts. And remember, true experts are usually humble about the limits of their knowledge. Be cautious of those who claim to know everything. Chapter 9. Contrast Effect. Now let's explore into a bias that affects our perception, the contrast effect. This occurs when the perception of something is enhanced or reduced by comparison with something else. Dobelli gives a simple example. If you lift a light object first and then a heavy object, the second will feel heavier than if you had only lifted the heavy object on its own. Our perceptions are relative, not absolute. This effect plays out in many areas of life. In dating, for example, people tend to be seen as more or less attractive depending on who they're with. A merely pretty person might seem stunning next to less attractive friends. In business, this effect is often demoralized. A realtor might first show you a run-down house at an inflated price. Then, the house they actually want to sell you seems like a bargain in comparison, even if it's objectively overpriced. The contrast effect can also influence our happiness. We judge our lives not by the objective quality of our experiences, but by comparing ourselves to others. This is why lottery winners often report being thrilled immediately after their win, but return to their baseline level of happiness relatively quickly. Once the difference with their old life fades, so does the joy. To fight this bias, Dobelli advises judging things on their own merits as much as possible. Don't compare, evaluate. Is this house worth the price, regardless of the other houses you've seen? Is this job satisfying, regardless of what your peers are doing? By focusing on fundamental value rather than relative value, you can make more objective decisions. Chapter 10. Availability bias. Let's examine a bias that can change our perception of risk, the availability bias. This is our tendency to overestimate the likelihood of events with greater availability in memory, which can be influenced by how recent the memories are or how unusual or emotionally charged they may be. Dobelli offers a striking example. After the 9/11 attacks, many Americans chose to drive rather than fly, viewing flying as more dangerous. However, this led to an estimated 1,595 additional highway loss of life in the year after the attacks. The intense emotional memories of 9/11 made flying seem incredibly risky, even though statistically, it remained far safer than driving. This bias affects us in many ways. We're more afraid of shark attacks than falling down stairs, even though the latter kills many more people each year. We worry more about homicide than diabetes, though diabetes is a far more likely cause of death for most people. The availability bias can also influence our decision-making. Managers might allocate more resources to problems that have occurred recently, regardless of their objective frequency or importance. Investors might invest to a particular sector because of a recent high-profile success story, overlooking more promising opportunities that haven't been in the news. To counter this bias, Dobelli suggests relying more on statistics than on immediate examples that come to mind. Yes, there might have been a recent plane crash in the news, but what do the overall statistics say about aviation safety? Sure, you might know someone who won the lottery, but what are the actual odds of winning? By seeking out this factual information, rather than relying on what immediately comes to mind, you can develop a more accurate picture of the world and make better decisions as a result. Top 5 learnings of the book. Now that we've explored some of the fascinating biases covered in The Art of Thinking Clearly, let's recap the top 5 learnings from the book. 1. Question success stories. Remember survivorship bias. Look beyond the winners and learn from the silent failures too. 2. Think independently. Don't let social proof dictate your actions. Just because everyone else is doing something doesn't mean it's right for you. 3. Focus on the future, not the past. Avoid the sunk cost fallacy by making decisions based on future prospects, not past investments. 4. Seek out disconfirming evidence. Combat confirmation bias by actively looking for information that challenges your beliefs. 5. Rely on statistics, not stories. Don't let availability bias skew your perception of risk. Look at the hard data instead of bright but rare events. By adopting these lessons, you'll be well on your way to clearer, more rational thinking. But remember, awareness is just the first step. The real challenge lies in applying these insights to your daily life. As we wrap up our journey through The Art of Thinking Clearly, it's important to reflect on the broader implications of Dobelli's work. This book isn't just about avoiding a few mental traps. It's about fundamentally changing how we approach the world. By understanding our cognitive biases, we gain a superpower, the ability to see the invisible forces that shape our thoughts and decisions. It's like putting on a pair of glasses that suddenly brings the world into sharper focus. But Dobelli's book also teaches us humility. No matter how smart or educated we are, we're all inclined to these thinking errors. Even being aware of them doesn't make us immune. It's a lifelong journey of attentiveness and self-reflection. So, what can we do with this knowledge? First, let's embrace intellectual honesty. When we make a decision, let's ask ourselves, am I falling for any of these biases? Is this really the best choice or just the most comfortable one? This self-questioning can be uncomfortable, but it's the path to clearer thinking. Second, let's cultivate a habit of looking at things from multiple angles. If we believe something, let's challenge ourselves to argue against it. If we're convinced we're right, let's imagine how we could be wrong. This mental flexibility is the antidote to rigid, biased thinking. Third, let's be patient with ourselves and others. Cognitive biases are part of being human. When we or others make mistakes, it's often not due to stupidity, but because of these hidden mental traps. Understanding this can make us more adapting and forgiving. Fourth, let's commit to continuous learning. The world is complex, and our perceptions often lead us off track. By staying curious, reading widely, and always being ready to update our beliefs in the face of new evidence, we can gradually improve our thinking. Lastly, let's remember that clear thinking is not just an academic exercise. It has real-world consequences. The decisions we make based on our thoughts affect our lives, our communities, and sometimes even the world. By thinking more clearly, we can make better choices, solve problems more effectively, and ultimately, create better outcomes for ourselves and others. The Art of Thinking Clearly is more than just a book. It's an invitation to a new way of seeing the world. It challenges us to question our assumptions, confront our biases, and strive for rationality in a world that often seems anything but rational. So as you go about your day, keep these insights in mind. The next time you're about to make an important decision, pause for a moment. Ask yourself if any of these biases might be at play. And then, armed with that awareness, make your choice. Remember, clear thinking is a skill, and like any skill, it improves with practice. So start practicing today. Your future self will thank you. That's all for today's video. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the art of thinking clearly. If you found this valuable, please hit the like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Hit the bell icon for more updates, for more insightful book summaries update. And remember, our goal here isn't just to summarize books, but to build a community of lifelong learners. So, drop a comment below and let us know. What's your biggest takeaway from today's video? Have you experienced any of these biases in your own life? How do you plan to apply these lessons? Your insights not only help us create better content, but they also inspire others in our community. So don't be shy, share your thoughts. If you liked this video, you will definitely like this video and left, and many more same videos in the playlist, which is in the right. If you're interested in Dobelli's work and want to dive deeper, consider checking out the audiobook version through Audible's 30-day free trial from description. You'll get 2 free audiobooks to keep, even if you cancel before the trial ends. If you like this book, buy book or ebook from description. Until next time, stay curious, stay rational, and keep growing. Happy reading.